Before we start, I must say something really quick. Wikipedia says that computer games are video games, and another thing, not all arcade games are video games, so I will not be mentioning things like the Sega Periscope, Chicago Coin Speedway, or pinball machines. Enjoy. Video games. Enjoyed by millions, making billions, everyone enjoys playing video games. Be it a console game like Wii Fit, Call of Duty, Gex, or Kirby, a PC game like TF2, Garry's Mod, Minecraft, or League of Legends, or even a mobile game such as Angry Birds, Pokemon Go, Clash of Clans, or Subway Surfers, it's impossible to deny that in this day and age, video games are everywhere. However, it hasn't always been that way. The first ever quote-unquote video game was the cathode ray amusement device. It was patented all the way back in January 25th, 1947. So it is possible that the device itself could have been constructed in 1946, but this January 1947 date is the earliest record of it, so we're just going with that. Anyways, the cathode ray amusement device is the first recorded electronic game that you can control and interact with. The gameplay of the game is irrelevant, but you can play it online in your browser, and it's a start. Too much adjusting knobs. But it was just the first video game, heavy air quotes there, nothing revolutionary. It was created by Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and Cecil Ray Mann. And while it is the earliest known video game, it was never actually released to the public, so it doesn't really have an effect on anything that comes after it. Heck, it's not even considered a video game. Wikipedia says so. But there will always be those geniuses in the comments section who say, well, actually, the cathode ray amusement device was the first video game. So yeah, here you go. Now let's move on. "1948 was another mostly uneventful year, with the only video game, again, heavy air quotes, it's only here because Google says it's a video game. Anyways, about a year after the cathode ray amusement device, on February 23rd, 1948, David Champernowne and Alan Turing, yes, the Alan Turing, creator of the Turing test and the concept of the Turing machine, created the first computer game, which was a chess bot known as TuroChamp. It was created as research into machine learning because it was capable of playing chess. However, it was never able to actually be tested, as it was way too complex to be run on any of the computers of its time. However, this too was only created by the pair for research purposes, and isn't considered by many to be the first video game. Alrighty, so 1950 saw the creation of Birdie the Brain, which was the first quote-unquote video game that was shown off to the public. It used a new form of the vacuum tube, which was widely used in computers at the time. However, with the creation of transistors in 1947, they were gradually replaced beginning this decade. And the entire purpose of Birdie the Brain was to show off this new mini vacuum tube, which was known as the Adatron tube. Anyways, Birdie the Brain was created by Joseph Cates for the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition, known nowadays as CNE or The X. It was capable of one thing and one thing only, that being playing tic-tac-toe. It was displayed prominently there from August 25th to September 9th, 1950, and the way it worked was that players could enter where they wanted to place their X or O with a 3x3 keypad, and light bulbs would light up accordingly. After that, the AI would take its turn and rinse and repeat until someone wins. But since it uses actual light bulbs instead of a screen with graphics and stuff, although I guess it could be considered an LCD screen, but those don't really use lights, so because of this, it doesn't really count as a video game. Although different people have different definitions, so I don't know. It was the first thing to have a display of any kind. Anyways, it had a difficulty slider and therefore is better than Elden Ring, according to gaming journalists, so it gets a 100 on Metacritic. After the exhibition, Birdie the Brain was promptly disassembled and forgotten. Okay, 1951. This is the first instance of where we are going to have to do some guesswork to figure some things out. At some point in 1951, I can't find when, some MIT students, most likely Charles Adams, Oliver Aberth, or Jack Gilmore, although we don't know who really made it, created a simulation of a bouncing ball known simply as Bouncing Ball on the Whirlwind 1 computer. The way it worked was that anyone playing the game could adjust three knobs, one for speed, one for bounce, and one for gravity. I guess these are controls, and they do alter the outcome of the game, that being the trajectory of the ball, and it does have an actual display now, so I guess you could call this the very first video game, and it even had graphics updating in real time, but I digress. After Bouncing Ball, or before, I can't find a true date for it, on May 5th, 1951, a computer called the Nimrod was built by the electrical engineering company Ferranti for the 1951 Festival of Britain. It allowed players to play NIM against the computer, and NIM is a mathematical game of strategy in which two players take turns removing objects from distinct heaps or piles. On each turn, a player must remove at least one object and may remove any number of objects, provided they all come from the same heap or pile. Anyways, players would have to press buttons corresponding with lights on the display, similar to Birdie the Brain, and yeah, that's pretty much all. Most of these early games are pretty boring. Also, fun fact, Nimrod weighed over a ton. Alright, now we must talk about a game that's creation begun in 1951 and concluded in 1952. That game is called Draughts. More commonly known as checkers, a man named Christopher Strachey decided to recreate draughts/checkers for the Pilot Ace computer. The reason he chose draughts/checkers of all games to recreate was because it was in the middle in terms of complexity. It wasn't too simple like tic-tac-toe or too complex like chess. However, when he tried to run it on the Pilot Ace in July 1951, it overloaded its memory. So later that year, he switched to the much more powerful Ferranti Mark I, and finally, the game ran. Later that year, I think, on June 19th, 1952, Alexander Shafto Douglas created a game for a project for his college at the University of Cambridge. The game was called OXO, or OXO maybe, and it was written for the EDSAC computer, which was capable of storing memory, and it was so big that it filled an entire room. The controls were similar to all games up to this point, and was just tic-tac-toe. I don't know what else to say here. Okay, so only one game was made in the 6-year range from OXO to Tennis for Two, and not much is known about it. It's called Hutspiel, and this is its entire Wikipedia article. It was a two-player game, the first one ever in fact, and it was made for civilian military research for the Johns Hopkins University. And the game simulated a war between NATO and Soviet Russia. That's pretty much all we know about the game. If you look up first video game on Google, Google will tell you about Tennis for Two, which was made on October 18th, 1958. But as you can probably tell, there have been many games that all happened before Tennis for Two. Anyways, Tennis for Two is a tennis game, obviously. It was created by two guys, William Higginbotham and Robert V. Dvorak. They made the game for the Brookhaven National Laboratory's annual public exhibition, and it took only a few hours to design, but 3 weeks to build. The game was present during the exhibition for 3 days and was very popular, just like all the other games present at exhibitions up to this point. The gameplay was just like watching a game of tennis from the side, and players could adjust their shot's trajectory with a knob. And of course, after the exhibition, the game was taken apart, just as its predecessors were. Oh boy, Mouse in the Maze. I can't find anything about the release date, if you can even call it that. These things aren't even mass produced yet, other than the fact that it was made in 1959. The game used a light pen to make a maze on a screen with walls and dots, which would represent cheese and glasses of martini. Anyways, after the player was done, a virtual mouse would move around the maze and try to find all the dots. The game was created by John E. Ward and Douglas T. Ross, and yeah, that's pretty much everything of note about the game. The 60s. Anyways, Space War. It has an exclamation mark at the end. Don't forget it. Was made by 5 guys. Steve Russell, Martin Grates, Wayne Wittanen, Bob Saunders, and Steve Piner. It was made for the PDP-1 mini computer, which was still bigger than any modern computer, at MIT, of course. Anyways, the game was very popular at MIT and was even put on many more PDP-1s, becoming the first video game to be played on more than one machine. The code was also public domain and was ported to many other computers of its time. The gameplay of the game has two players try and shoot each other like asteroids, but without the asteroids, and with two ships, one for each person. There was one other video game made this year. It was called Marienbad. All it was another recreation of the game Nim, like the earlier Nimrod, but this time it wasn't for research or made by a few smart kids at MIT. This time it was created by Polish engineer Witold Pogorski because he saw the game Nim being played in the 1961 film last year at Marienbad, hence the name. The gameplay was just Nim, which we discussed earlier. 1964 had one game made in its entirety, and it was called the Sumerian game. The Sumerian game did not have any graphics and was instead a text-based game. The first one ever, in fact, which Google is in a denial about. Anyways, the game was made to teach kids in schools land and resource management. It was developed by the Board of Cooperative Educational Services in Westchester County, New York, and IBM. It was designed by Mabel Addis, who was a 4th grade teacher, and was coded by William McKay for the IBM 7090 computer. The game had the player try and govern the Sumerian city Lagash by figuring out how to distribute grain and labor, with each decision affecting later decisions. Probably the first game with actual substance to it. Alright, last time skip, I swear. At some point during 1968, a game simply known as Civil War was made. I can't find gameplay or anything outside of this page regarding the game. It just tells me that it's a turn-based battle game where you have to manage money well and strategize to win battles, and that the player plays against the computer, and then the computer compares it to the outcome of the actual American Civil War. That's it. But wait, there's more. A game called Hammurabi was also made this year. It was literally the same as the Sumerian game from 4 years prior, but this time, you get to play as Hammurabi, who is the 6th king of Babylon. Nothing else really to say about it, it's just a clone of the Sumerian game. And also, one more thing. Everything up to this point has been talking about old games that some wouldn't even consider video games, but at some point in 1968, a man named Ralph Baer created a prototype for the first home video game system. It would let people play video games on their television, at home. Anyways, we'll come back to this in a bit. First, we have to talk about...
I got any number of times.
Sorry about that, but I am legally obligated. Anyways, 1969 saw the creation of 2 video games, both related to space. Gee, I wonder why. Okay, so the goal of the game, called Lunar Lander, was to land a lunar lander on the moon's surface without crashing. It ran on the PDP-8 computer and was entirely text-based. The way that it works is that the game tells you the weight of the lander and how much fuel you have, and you have to pretend that you are an astronaut, and every turn of the game represents 10 seconds of time in a lander, and on each one of these turns, you have to type in a burn rate for the fuel, which must be between 0 and 200. The game will take this information and tell you your altitude in miles and feet, how much fuel you have, your speed, and of course, will list all previous turns. It's a great game for people who enjoy applying their knowledge of physics and math. And now, the other game made this same year, Space Travel. It was made for the PDP-7 computer instead of the PDP-8, which leads me to believe that it was made slightly before Lunar Lander, although there's no way to truly know. Anyways, the game was created by Ken Thompson and has the player fly a ship around a 2-dimensional scale model of the solar system and try to land on the various celestial bodies. Speed was adjustable and gravity existed. However, Ken Thompson did later go on to make his own operating system, which later became the Unix operating system. Alright, new decade, and with that we have the final year where only one video game was made, and that one game was called High Noon, not to be confused with the game of the same name on the Commodore 64 computer. For this one, I could find an actual release date, which is December 9th, 1970. Anyways, the game is a text-based game which simulates a gunfight in the Old West. The game has you and an enemy named Bart, each with 4 bullets starting 100 paces apart. The game has you and Bart take turns, and on each turn you can do one of 5 things. You can either fire your gun, move closer, which increases the chance of the bullet hitting the opponent, jump for cover, run, or give up. So much to do! That's about it. Again, it's hard to find documentation on these old games. Okay, 1971 had 6 games released, all of which don't have verifiable release date, and those that do have different dates from different sources, so I won't really talk about them in any particular order. First up, baseball. I can't find anything on this game, no plot, no gameplay, no screenshots, only that it's called baseball, was made on the PDP-10 computer, and was improved over time. We can only assume that it was about the American sport, and not just another game about flying through space. Next up, Empire. This one was created by Peter Langston for the HP 2000 mini computer at Evergreen State College, and Wikipedia says it was released in 1972, while IMDb says 1971, so I don't know, I just went with the first one I found. The source code for the game was actually lost long ago, so all we know about the game actually comes from 2 new versions of the game made by 2 other people. The game is turn-based and has players managing different sectors of a game world. It's in the 4X genre of video games and is presumably the first such game. The genre pretty much says everything about the gameplay in this instance, so I'll just tell you that the game has 2 modes, normal and blitz, with blitz games taking upwards of a few hours, while normal games take up to a year to complete. This all depends on the size of the game world, of course, but god, that's a long time for a game. You could 100% Batten Kaido's Eternal Wings in the Lost Ocean for the Nintendo GameCube 25 times in that much time. If you speedrun it, of course. Next up, Galaxy Game. Galaxy Game was created by Bill Pitts and Hugh Tuck on the PDP-11 mini computer. It was just an enhanced version of Space War from 1962, now being coin-operated. The gameplay was exactly the same, but now there's money. The original prototype of Galaxy Game cost the 2 of them about 20,000 United States dollars in 1971 money, which is equivalent to about $134,000 in today's money. The prototype consisted of a PDP-11 computer attached to a monitor, controller, and chairs for the players. The game costed 10 cents for 1 game, or 25 cents for 3 games. It was one of the first coin-operated video games, and likely started the arcade game revolution of the 70s and 80s. Okay, don't worry, we're about half done with 1971. You ever hear of Star Trek? Well, Mike Mayfield made a text-based game based on it for the SDS Sigma 7 computer. The game has the player control the USS Enterprise starship and fly through the galaxy, hunting down Klingon warships before the time runs out. The game was also literally just called Star Trek. Next up is, drumroll please, the Oregon Trail. Everyone knows the Oregon Trail. It's the one educational game that's actually enjoyable. I even played it in 6th grade history class against all my classmates. The game has the player play as the leader of a caravan, leading settlers all the way from Independence, Missouri to Oregon. You have to fight off disease, wild animals, bad weathers, and figure out how to stay alive. 10 out of 10, 5 stars, would play again. And finally, the last one of the games released in 1971 was Computer Space. It was created by 2 guys who you may have heard of, Nolan Bushnell and Tad Dabney. Together, the 2 of them would go on to found Atari. Also, Nolan Bushnell founded Chuck E. Cheese for some reason. Anyways, Computer Space is yet another version of Space War, and has the player control a spaceship and fight other spaceships. It's wild. The game was coin-operated just like Galaxy Game, but unlike Galaxy Game, they didn't spend their own money to build each unit, and they instead found a manufacturer, that being Nutting Associates, to create the cabinets, 1,500 of them, which the pair designed to look futuristic. And the final year with stuff to talk about before Pong is, of course, 1972. Or rather, the first 11 months of 1972. 2 major events happened here. The first happened on June 27th, 1972, when Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, the Computer Space guys, founded the company Atari. And finally, in September 1972, the first commercially available home video game console released. Its name was the Magnavox Odyssey. Ralph Baer made his return to the forefront of video games with help of the Sanders Associates and Magnavox, turning the brown box into something greater, the Magnavox Odyssey. It sold terribly, retailing for $99.95, which is equal to about $647 in today's money. It sold a measly 350,000 units. To put that into perspective, that's less than half of what the Virtual Boy sold. Although the Odyssey does have an excuse, it was the first machine of its kind, and one of the reasons it could have sold so poorly was the advertising.
This is Odyssey, the new electronic game simulator. You attach Odyssey to your television set in seconds to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey is tennis, roulette, football and hockey, analogic, and geography. Odyssey comes complete with 12 electronic games and educational experiences. Many more are optionally available, like a shooting gallery, a prehistoric safari. Odyssey is an electronic teacher. Odyssey is a total play and learning experience for all ages. Odyssey. It's new from Magnavox. Odyssey.
The advertising sucked. It's almost as if the people marketing the game had no idea how to market a completely new kind of machine other than just talking about how to use it and what you can do with it. The Odyssey launched with 12 games: table tennis, ski, Simon Says, tennis, analogic, hockey, football, cat and mouse, haunted house, submarine, roulette, and states. The games were all very similar, with the player moving squares around in different ways on a black screen. The games didn't even have any such thing as graphics, or whatever they're called. They instead had translucent mats that you would stick onto the screen. The controllers weren't much better either, having two knobs you could turn, one for horizontal movement and one for vertical movement. These were on either side of the white box body of the controller, all topped with a single reset button. Not at all ergonomic, and most likely intended to be played on a table. And that's the entirety of video game history until that fateful day when Pong released. This is part 1 of a series I'll do covering all of video game history, but I'm never doing a range of years this big ever again, heavens no. Anyways, if you have any obscure facts about video games and their history, or obscure consoles, or just anything you should be in this documentary, then leave it in the comments. Also, if this seems rushed, then just know that Pong released on November 29th, 1972, and look at the day this video released. Exactly, 50 years! Whoa! Part 2 will come 2023, most likely. See ya.